It is impossible to live without failing at something, unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you fail by default. That is a quote from J.K. Rowling, a British author of the famous Harry Potter series. Although it is important to fail and fail gloriously in life, especially to have a successful career, this episode talks about real failure. We thought we would do a twist on the top 5 things young professionals need to do to succeed and flip it around and list all the things you should do if you want your career to come down hard, crashing and burning. Enjoy the jokes and laughs in our Opposite Day podcast.
You're listening to Young PR Pros, episode 120, How to Fail.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Young PR Pros, a podcast for the young and young at heart PR pros looking for tips and advice on how to build and advance their careers. I am Christine Darbell in Ottawa, Canada.
I'm Julia Kent in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
I'm Ross Simmons, also in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
And I'm Claire Bonnyman in Toronto, Ontario.
So, Ross, you posted a Facebook post a few months ago with a funny twist. You posted your top 10 ways to fail, but not in what we've talked about in previous episodes, the glorious fail where you learn something important, that fail that makes your career, but actual real failure. For example, you said, if you want to fail as a young professional, never seek help and only hang out with people who think and act like you. So, that is today's topic of discussion. Instead of doing our typical list of things young PR pros or young pros need to do to be successful, we will list things you can do if you want your career to fail really, really badly. So we hope you have some, we're going to have some fun with this episode. We hope you laugh. And Ross, I think you were saying earlier that your podcast or your Facebook post actually got a lot of love when you posted that.
It did. It generated quite the interesting discussion. I had a lot of people sending me private messages saying that they really needed to see something like that. One of the recommendations that I made and told people to do was, if you want to fail, stay comfortable. And I had a lot of people message me and be like, wow, Ross, that really hit home with me. I've been taking the comfortable kind of approach over the last little bit, and it's time for me to kind of switch it up. So it was cool to see the reactions. And then a few people even threw in their own ideas and recommendations on what people should do if they want to fail. So it was pretty funny, and it's going to be fun to talk about it with you guys.
So you started with one of your tips for failure is to stay comfortable. Is there another tip that you want to share from your list?
Yeah, so one that I love and I think is extremely relevant and very interesting in today's world is to only consume content that confirms your beliefs. So it's this idea that we all go into our own little bubbles and we read content that we know is going to make us feel good. So you're going to read a blog post that confirms what you already know. You're not going to follow the news of people who disagree with you. You're only going to stay within the world that keeps you comfortable. And I think that is what will lead you to failure. If you're not open to a diverse series of thoughts, it's going to increase the likelihood of you being met with disappointment, aka you look at the results after the election and things like that. If you're solely consumed in your own bubble, it's going to be difficult for you to navigate when things go astray and when you're being met with opinions that are different from yours. So I think that you need to invest time and energy in reading books that don't always agree with you, reading blog posts that don't always agree with your thoughts, and spending time with people who don't always agree with your thought processes as well.
Yeah, and so Ross, the election that you're referring to is obviously the U.S. election. And I thought what was really interesting when that happened is if you watched, CBS News, everyone was saying that, Hillary Clinton was going to win, and it was like such a clear landslide that she was going to win. And then you switched over to Fox News, and everyone was like, no, there's a clear, landslide that Trump is going to win. But they both sides reinforced their beliefs. And then when Trump won and you flipped over to CBS, it was like blank faces where it's like, what happened? Yeah. How did we get it so wrong? And I think nowadays it's so, if you don't actually actively go out there and try to seek things that are against what you normally believe in so that you can kind of get a holistic view of what's going on. If you don't actively do it, you're never actually going to have the door open to other people's perspective. Because even the way that social media works, the stuff that you see on your Facebook feed, if you like something, you're obviously going to get more stuff like that. The more you like about a certain topic or about a certain person or about whatever it is, the more you're going to see it on your Facebook feed. So that's just like one example of just that reinforcement that you're only seeing what you like and the views that you consume, right? So you actually have to actively go out there and look for it.
100%. And I follow tons of different pages that I don't even agree with, just because I want to see what other people think. And it's something that I've been doing for the past 2 years, and it's been refreshing, but at the same time scary. But it's something that I've done to kind of ensure that I don't get sideswiped when a story or something comes out in the news that I didn't really say would align with my views and my worldview of a certain topic or issue.
Definitely. Really good tip. Claire, what is the one thing that you think people should do if they want to fail at their career?
I think, and this is a pretty relevant one, is how I came up with this, so I don't even know if I'm doing it right, but doubt yourself every day and make a ton of self-deprecating jokes. It's coming to that point in the year when all the students are graduating and coming out of programs and applying for jobs, and I think it's really easy to fall back on a self-deprecating sense of humor and constantly kind of being the humble person in the room, which is great and all when you're making friends, but I think a lot of young people, myself 100% included, are afraid to really own a lot of the achievements that you have and a lot of the skills that you have. And I think that if you want to fail, absolutely keep making those jokes, because one day you're going to believe them fully. But if you don't want to fail, like stand up and own a lot of the things that you've done and want to do, and have a little bit more confidence in yourself. Talk yourself up more, because you're not being boastful as much as you think you are, I think.
And to follow up on that, so as some of you may have known, I was the MC at the University of Ottawa Public Relations Association's conference in March, and the keynote speaker at the end of the day was Bradley Mosley Williams, who was actually an old professor of mine at Algonquin College. And one of the things that he said in his talk, which I think really relates back to Claire's point, is he said, words turn into actions. So if you sit there and you tell yourself over and over and over again that you're not good enough, you're not a good writer, you're not a public speaker, you would never stand up and speak in front of 100 people, that you don't like the way that you write, you don't like the way that you dress, and if you keep having that negative reinforcement, it'll eventually become true. You'll eventually not be able to speak in front of everyone. You'll eventually just not be able to write. So you need, obviously, like just saying it is not the only thing. You also have to work at it a little bit. But if you continually to talk down on yourself and on your experience, you'll do it so much that if you keep telling yourself you'll fail, you will fail, and not in the glorious way for your career. It'll actually be a failure for your career. So that's a very good point, Claire. Julia, what about your tip?
My tip, if you want to fail, I would say be a gossip. So this is a piece of advice I give to any of the younger than I professionals that I mentor, and it is to listen lots and keep your mouth shut, and don't be too interested in gossip. And this was a tough one for me to learn, because it's always interesting in the office or in your circles to hear, someone's, underperforming, or someone's going to get let go soon, or, oh, your colleague really hates this other person in your office just as much as you do. And it's so tempting to get sucked into that sort of drama and to engage in conversations, commiserating with other people. I would just caution young professionals, but any professional, to listen, absorb, and to just bite your tongue. And you will walk away from those sorts of conversations all the wiser, with a little bit more ammunition under your belt, but you won't have done anything to jeopardize your reputation, because nobody likes a gossip and nobody trusts a gossip. And you just never know what you say who it's going to get back to or how it's going to be perceived. So that's my number one tip for professionals of any age at any stage in their career. Stay out of the gossip. Or in this case, if you'd like to fail at your career, you should gossip a lot.
Well, I think, Julia, you hit on a really good point about, just when you're in a conversation, to sit back and actually listen and not always jump in and add your own opinion, your own anecdote or what you heard about. But just in general, I think that's something that we can all learn to do better. We're all probably type A personalities and always want to, share something new. And we probably have a bunch of stuff to say and we always want to jump in and add something. But I think sometimes it's important to just sit and actually listen to what the other person is saying, because I think that's more valuable. If you're listening to what someone's saying, you're actually really going to grasp what they're saying and maybe learn something new. So that whole listening part, I think, is a really important thing. So one way to fail is never listen to anyone and continually to just barge in with your own stories. If you don't want to fail, opening yourself up to actually listening and just being in the background a little bit and observing and listening to what everyone's saying. And then when the time is right and you do have something to add, then obviously, you should never stay 100% quiet. You should be adding your own comments, but I think start off with listening and asking questions as well. I think is really a really important way to learn more. So my, tip for failure is never learn something new. And I think this is really relevant for me in my journey right now I'm in the process of applying to start a master's in communications. So I think in this step, I'm hoping to learn something new. And I think, again, learning doesn't necessarily always have to mean that you have to go to university or go to a college or post-secondary, whatever it is. Learning could just be reading books, kind of going back to what Ross was saying earlier on, reading something that's new to you, maybe reading a different view that you had never really heard of or a view that you disagree, learning what the other side is saying. I think as soon as you stop learning, and then again, going back to the other thing that was Ross saying, and you're too comfortable, that's where your career, I think, will stagnate. And eventually, if you ever do want to move up, you won't be able to, because you won't have anything new to add. And the way to move up in a career is to bring something new to the table and bring something new to a team. So if you never learn and you just continue to do the same thing every single day, then you will eventually fail at your career. So anyone else have another failure that another tip to fail that they want to jump in with?
I have one that's a pet peeve of mine. And it's small, compared to some of the tips for failure that were in Ross's original post and some of the ones we've talked about today. This one's a small one, but for me as a manager, it makes a really big difference. I think I'm just going to get a reputation on this podcast as being super judgmental because I judge you if you have a bad handshake. I'm quick to judge, and I am. But one thing above and beyond your handshake that will give me a really bad impression, and if it continues, probably irreparably damage your reputation with me, is if you don't proofread your work. So, tip for failure: never proofread your work. I come from, just like Claire, the journalism school, where, typos in a proper name or person, a misspell in a proper name or person is an F. It is a fail. And
yep,
it is unacceptable. It is just unacceptable, especially in 2017 when Google takes you less than 5 seconds to just type in the name and verify that you've spelled it correctly? For me, I can't feel strongly enough about, I can't express strongly enough how serious I am about this. I think you really lose credibility when you don't proofread your stuff. And the biggest and most important instance of proofreading is always resumes and cover letters. And I can't tell you how many resumes and cover letters I have received that had typos in them. So triple check. In journalism school, they used to tell us to read things backwards. And it's really weird how that actually helps you catch things. And I read absolutely everything of any importance aloud. always, 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 always read it aloud. And when people do a typo and I catch it, I ask them, "Did you read it aloud?" And the answer is always, "No, I didn't have time," or "No, I just wanted to get it submitted." And I'm like, "Your mistake, man. I told you to read it aloud." So that's my thing. If you'd like to fail, never proofread your work.
I think it's funny. You and Claire come from this journalism background where like a typo would be a failure. And I don't understand why in the PR and communications industry, that's not the same thing. Like it should be the same thing. If you're in a PR and communications, like education, and actually, so in one of my classes when I was at college doing my PR diploma, I think it was like the writing class or something like that. In that class, it was a failure if there was any typo, but it should have been in every class. Like I think as PR communications marketing experts, we should be treated like journalists in the sense where our writing needs to be impeccable, because that's what that's like 80% of what we bring to the table is the writing, right? The press release writing, the memos, whether it's a tweet, a Facebook post, a blog post, there's so much writing involved in our industry that's got to be something that is brought over from journalism into the PR industry, I think.
I disagree.
What?
Okay, I gotta hear this.
I disagree.
What?
I'm going to be that guy.
Oh.
I am completely disagreeing. So I don't think that typos, one typo in an entire press release or one typo in an entire essay or in a resume should ever overcloud somebody's accomplishments or the entire project that somebody's done. I think that if a resume comes across your desk and this person has a Harvard degree and they made a simple mistake where they spelt dear wrong or something like that, that person still is a rock star.
I agree with you, Ross.
And you have to give them...
I'm not being that extreme. I'm not saying like an amazing submission or amazing project or like whatever. I'm talking about somebody who repeatedly sends me shit that... Can I say shit on this podcast? Well, I just did.
I don't
might
know.
have to get...
Producer Claire,
I don't know if we made that decision, but...
This one might have to have the explicit little clarification.
I'm talking about someone who's a problem, someone who doesn't read their work, or someone that, like, for example, if someone did a press release and, misspelled, like, I remember the one when I was in journalism school, people would spell Stephen Harper with a V.
Right.
And it was like, are you friggin' kidding me? Like, what rock are you living under? Like, so I'm talking about stuff like that, I guess. And... yeah, to your point, if you're like overall a badass individual who's produced badass work, I mean, a typo's not going to kill you. Not even in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
I think if you're writing a press release and the headline has a typo, like that's a fail. You've messed up. Yeah. Same if you sent out an email blast and it has a typo in the headline, that's a fail. But I would say that if a teacher or a prof is failing people just because they have one typo in an entire essay, that's a little extreme. I don't think that should happen.
no, journalism school, it is proper names, right, Claire?
Well, it's proper names, but in my years too, I knew people who spelled certain things, and it wasn't a proper noun in any way, and they still got failed because it's just the idea that if you publish it for a publication, they're gonna have to file like a misprint, that kind of thing, and it creates this whole process. So it was really just trying to scare you,
that's true.
and it worked. It really worked, but I have those fears like every day as I'm handing anything in. But I think more than that, though, like jumping off of Julia's point, like you think about it, but it's the little things. It's just about not ignoring the little things, spell checking, sending thank you emails after interviews, right? Like it's the little things. And if you ignore the little things, you are setting yourself up for failure, whether that is, misspelling Stephen Harper's name or just being really overly aggressive with your handshake, like...
And Ross, I get your point, and I understand that, we shouldn't obviously fail someone or overlook some of their accomplishments, but I think the importance of making sure that there are no typos and the importance of reinforcing that at a young age for like students when they're in school and making that a stipulation is the reinforcement of that attention to detail, because I mean typos is just is the first thing to attention to detail. If you can pay attention to everything that you've written in your assignment and made sure that there are no typos and there's nothing wrong, and you've gone through that, I'm hoping that at the same time, because you're reading through it, there's also the attention to detail to your argument and to how you're wording things. And so, I mean, I get that there's an extreme to this, and I would hope that, professors wouldn't be failing people for just no reason, or just the fact that you spelt one tiny word in an entire beautifully written essay that had, solid points and well thought out thesis and all that kind of stuff. But just in general, I think that sort of sentiment from the journalism industry, that the attention to detail and the importance of reading out loud, and making sure that you pay attention to every single thing that you put down, I still think it's a really important thing for our industry to grab onto.
I think it's important, but I do think that the one piece that scares me around that idea is that people will never actually ship anything and publish anything or put anything out there because they're so afraid that they're going to have a one typo and the industry is going to attack them because of it. And that's what I hate to see. People are afraid to publish stuff because they are going to get somebody who calls them out on having bad grammar or they misspelled something. And I think that does more harm for the industry than it does good.
Interesting perspective. I mean, having worked...
I think we're going to agree to disagree.
When I say that, I'm not being...
Yeah, no, for sure. Because when I think about it, it's like the people who... like some of the most successful writers that I know and that I follow online, they have typos in their work, and their focus is just shipping content, putting out their stories, getting their ideas out there. And if there's a typo, then one of their readers will see it, somebody will comment, they'll fix it, and then they call it a day. I don't think that you should allow grammar or typos to hold you back from pushing out your work and getting your ideas out there. Ever.
But I think it is about context though, right? Like when you're publishing something digitally in a certain way, you can go and you can make those changes and you can get the feedback. But if you're putting out like a press release and sending it to an organization as like a PDF, like there is no changing that. And I think it just depends whether you're being the voice of authority or whether you're being a voice of a person or an expert. I think it's all very dependent, and it's a good point because like if a physicist from Harvard applied to a job and they misspelled a word, like no one's going to care. But if Justin Trudeau put out a press release and misspelled like a bunch of words and put, the I after the E and stuff, everyone's going to be like, okay, like who's on his team, right? So I think it's totally contextually based.
Yeah. I think there's a place and a time for typos. And I do get what you're saying, Ross. I mean, if you're like, you look at young PR pros, right? When I first started blogging, and when we first started the first couple of episodes, I'm pretty, and I'm calling out, to our listeners, feel free to go back to those early ones. You will probably find a typo because at the time my audience was very small and I just wanted to experience it, and the typos was the last thing. I still tried to read through everything and I still tried to catch typos as often as possible, but in the end it was like, okay, really, who's reading this? It's a few people, and this is just for fun so that I can...
I was reading it.
Yes, I know, Julia was reading it. And Julia probably caught the majority of my typos, and I did try to change most of them. But I think nowadays, if I were to write a press release on behalf of CAA, send it out to journalists and have not just one or even like a few typos, I lose credibility from journalists, and journalists will shut down and they'll say, well, why am I reading this? I can't understand it, especially if it's not properly written and the grammar's wrong. And it's nowadays when we're trying to get attention from a journalist, we've got such the small window, and because the journalism industry comes from this world where typo equals death, if they're reading a press release from someone and there's even just one typo, they're already like shut down, and why am I even going to read this? How do I know that there's not 5 more typos in there? So I think for like to give
unless it's an amazing story.
Unless it's an amazing story. Well, yeah, and then hopefully it's so amazing that they
captivating.
Captivating that they've completely overlooked a typo, which is possible.
Which is what it should be.
That's true.
That's what it should be. You should strive to have a story so amazing that even with a typo, they would be like, I'm writing about this.
I'm sitting here chuckling because I'm like laughing. Like Christine's like
Christine's like, typos equal death for journalists. And I'm like chuckling because I'm like, yes, this is the world Claire and I live in.
Yeah, that sounds like
Yeah.
my undergrad in a nutshell, is just the 4 years of just typo equals death, which is hilarious because then you get into a newsroom and you're following leads on stories from, Facebook and Twitter direct messages from people who are not spelling correctly at all. But it's true. It's a fascinating story sometimes that they're telling, so you reach out to them. So you use your better judgment, I think. But yeah, no, typo equals death. That's what I studied
So-
for
What
4
a
years.
tangent.
I
What
was
a
about to say,
tangent.
we've completely changed the topic of this episode from things you need to do to fail to let's talk about, the pros and cons to typos in the communications industry. Anyway.
Hey, podcast listeners. This month, we are giving away a free copy of Hustle Manifesto, 100 tips for your first 100K to one lucky person. All you need to do is head over to iTunes and leave us a review. We will choose one lucky person and send them this free gift as a thank you. So, thank you. And now, back to the show.
I think we actually have to wrap it up. Otherwise, we could go on for hours. But
We had some good tips, though.
we did have some good tips. And actually, Claire, that brings us to our lessons learned, if you want to introduce it.
Yeah, so I will say we learned quite a few lessons, especially about typos. So we come to my favorite part where everyone gets to say it. And because we say it out loud, no one knows if you're spelling it right. So, Christine, what did you learn today?
What did I learn? Well, I learned that I actually love having these heated discussions with Ross. This was actually a lot of fun. And I love that we're still laughing at the end of the episode because this is what it's all about. Lesson learned. You know what? I'm going to go back to one of the first things that Ross said because I think it's important is not being too comfortable. The moment you're comfortable means that's the time that you actually need to start moving, which is something that, I when I was in college, one of my professors told me that, and I've really, really, really tried to stick to that. Now, I get that there are times in your life that you may want to be comfortable depending on what you're going through. So could be going through a big move. You might not want to be changing a whole bunch of stuff right in your career. Or, you're starting a family. You might not want to all of a sudden be switching things up in your career. But even at that point, my son's about to turn 2 and I'm already starting to, switch up my career by trying to reach for the stars and trying to see if I can get into this master's program. So I really like that tip, and I think it's something that we should always live by. And if you can live by that, then I think you're going to be successful until the end of your days.
Julia?
I actually really like, in our conversation about typos, I really like Ross's point that, you can't, this fear of typos can't be stopping people from putting stuff out there. That's a really good point. It does not convince me that my typophobia is, actually typophobia could actually be another phobia, by the way, that we're not, that I'm, it's a misnomer, yeah. But it does not convince me that my fear of typos is less severe or less warranted, but that is a really good point. And in a lot of platforms these days that are more casual, Christine, like the blog kind of thing, it is more acceptable, right? Like I read probably 20 blogs a day, and I bet you half of them have a typo somewhere in each post. I know all my blog posts, probably every single one had a typo. So good perspective. Thank you, Ross. That's what I learned today.
Sweet.
And Ross?
I learned that there's actually profs out there who are failing people for having a typo. That is mind-blowing.
There's a lot of problems.
That is mind-blowing. But I do get it from the journalist kind of storytelling through print lens. I completely get that. But I did not know that was actually taking place, where people took typos so seriously that you would get an F. Mind blown.
So to be fair,
Yeah.
I did it once.
Oh, no.
In my last semester of my degree, but I was writing an article on Patrick Brown's Butterfly Mind. He's a very famous CBC journalist, and I have a friend named Robert Brown. And in one instance in the article, I said Robert Brown, not Patrick Brown. And it was an analytical piece, so the use of his first name and last name, Claire, in case you were wondering, on second reference, was acceptable. So I called him Robert Brown, and the prof caught it and knocked me from an A+ to a B+, which for my straight A+ journalistic career was devastating enough in and of itself. But they do have mercy, Ross. So fear not.
Yeah, so I can buy that. I like that approach, as long as you're not getting enough. Because when I've had journalists write my name Simmons with a Y, and I was very upset. So giving somebody a couple notches off is good, but never an F. I think that's crazy.
You're too kind, Ross. You're too nice. I think that's what I learned today. I think it was a good reminder. That whole interaction is just a good reminder about not only attention to detail and the importance of communication. Because Ross didn't like it when his name was spelled wrong. But more than that, it actually ties back to a lot of things that I've been hearing from industry professionals as I start to kind of move into the networking mode of graduation again. But the idea that you're human, so you make mistakes sometimes. But you should probably still try to avoid those mistakes if you can, because there will be people out there who are looking for those mistakes and they don't want to see them because they know you can do better. But you're also human. And I think it's a really interesting balance and a really cool argument. But what I learned today is Ross is really nice and Julia is incredible attention to detail. So.
I do. They call me, in 2 jobs, they've called me Eagle Eyes, okay? So... yeah, I'm a little anal that way.
And your
So
story...
you'd be an amazing proofer to have in the office.
And your story makes me feel good because I once wrote a story in J School about a guy named, it was like John Ryan. So, of course, at one point I called him like Ryan John because if you have 2 first names, I can't do you. But needless to say...
Did you get failed?
No, luckily it was another one of those cases where he was like, I referred to them like just by their last name, but instead of John Ryan, I said John. And they were like, okay. They're like, oh, why'd you use the first name? And I was like, yeah, that's what I did there.
Yeah.
And again, it was like the last part of 4th year. So at this point, you know the prof, you know them well, they know you, and you're just sleep deprived. So they're like, it's fine. But yeah.
Yes.
There's mercy. There is mercy.
Yes.
There's mercy.
I have no mercy.
Julie has no mercy. I think that's...
Nobody's going to want to work for me ever again.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We really appreciate the love and support. Please leave us a review on iTunes. It means the world to us. And please definitely check out our blog as well, youngprpros.ca. I'm Ross Simmons. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next time. This episode featured tracks from Poddington Bear. The sound work and editing was done by the wonderful Claire Bonnyman.